I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2021 Peugeot 2008 GT Sport, which is the top of the line car in the new generation 2008. Compared to the old 2008, which launched in 2013, the only thing this car shares with that car is the engine, which we'll discover when we drive it, and that's a good thing because it's great. The rest of the car is completely new. In fact, this car has been such a success so far in Europe that it is Europe's biggest selling SUV in 2021. For the first 5 months of the year, it has just managed to outsell the Volkswagen Tiguan and the Volkswagen T-Cross, with the next car behind that being Peugeot's own 3008 and then the Renault Captur, which is actually this car's direct competitor. So for a small SUV in Europe, it is way ahead of all of its competitors, certainly sales-wise. From the look of it too, I think it really stands out, this new car. It's probably the last Peugeot to have the old line in the grille, which it's had since the 70s, and I'm going to miss that because I think that the new Shield that we're about to see debut looks a little bit like it's off a Proton, but that's just my opinion. One thing that I love that Peugeot has brought back from the past though is putting the model badge on the bonnet. Just like a 404 in the 60s and a 504 in the 70s. It gives a real charm to it and it perfectly suits the car. This GT Sport is the top of the line one, as I mentioned, so it gets everything. It has full LED headlights and these really cool sort of cat's claw, cat scratch kind of LED running lights. They're in Parkers here now. When they're in LED, when the car is running, they're even brighter, but all the way from there to there gives a really striking look to the car. And looking at this car from dead front on, it has a real stance and a presence about it. It is so much more muscular than the quite effete 2008 it replaced, which was really just kind of a small wagon, whereas this is actually a proper small SUV. And it's not a small one either. It rides on a 2600mm wheelbase. It's more than 4.3 meters long, which is not small at all. In fact, we'll discover when we get inside, all of that brings really great benefits. This GT Sport version is the only one with 18-inch wheels. They're these black Onyx Evisa, I think they're called, with Michelin 215 55/18 tyres. I quite like them, but I think I like the diamond cut 17s on the lower spec models better than these. They're just sort of there. We also get black mirror caps, GT badges in these little inserts here. It has a diamond black roof, in this case with a huge optional sunroof. These inbuilt roof rails here. Love these little creases in the body that sort of blend out. There's a lot of bits and pieces of details on this car that don't seem excessive like they might seem on a new Hyundai Tucson, you know. And the tail lights continue that beautiful detail from the front. They have these three little clawish like red ember things glowing in the back. Peugeot written across here in a fairly elegant kind of way, instead of just writing the model name on the back like everything else. And again, from the back of the car, it has this stance and a presence about it. It sort of sits really nicely on its wheels. And in here, we have a really good boot. Peugeot says that this has 434 litres when it's like this, which is with the floor at its highest level. So when the split fold backrests go down, they're almost flat, but you can take it out and there's 545 litres, which is huge in a small SUV. You do only have a space saver spare underneath, but that's massive. And that's a real benefit to having a car like this. Putting it back though is not really the most delicate of things. And it doesn't have an electric tailgate either, but not many small SUVs do. Continuing the point of difference of the new 2008 from outside is the interior of the car. This is not a normal interior. This is unlike most other car interiors, so it does take a little bit of time to get used to when you get in it. First and foremost, even though you have this great view, you do sit quite low in the car. So you've got quite a high belt line here and the dashboard is quite high. So it really does make you feel ensconced in the vehicle. You've got this huge wide center screen here, a 10-inch one in the GT Sport here that has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, that is wired. It only has 6 speakers, but it is a really good stereo, has its own 3D navigation and all that sort of stuff. But it also has this sort of 3-dimensional instrument pack here that kind of seems to float ahead of you. There's even little gaps around the instrument here where you can put your hands. Like it's sort of like its own little pod system. And typically with Peugeot and Citroën cars, you can scroll through and choose how you want the dials, whether you want it to show navigation and that sort of stuff. It definitely adds a tech element to the car, which it should, because, you know, it's a new car. This GT Sport does have a few extras over the other 2008s though, because that is shared with the other models. It has this flat bottomed GT wheel with this really cool sort of greeny chartreuse stitching around it, and this tiny steering wheel. Now, this driving position is going to be a little bit challenging for some people because, as per anything with this iCockpit arrangement, which has been around for 2 generations now, they want you to sit with the wheel quite low and the instruments directly ahead of you, and that's meant to be the way that you drive. And if you don't drive like that, then the top of the steering wheel rim covers all of the instruments. In this case, this is where I have to have it to be able to see, and I can just see over the top of it, but I don't have an issue with it. I think I don't know, it feels good. The steering's quick and the steering wheel's nice and smooth and small, and it just seems to work, but I'm sure that everyone else doesn't feel that way. Let us know what you think in the comments below. The rest of the interior really has a class about it. This sort of stitched carbon fibre, I'm sure Tom will absolutely hate it, but I quite like it. It's padded in the dash bit here, which is quite nice, and just is really nice and smooth. The doors are a little bit squidgy. The dash is even more squidgy and has this same stitching along the front of it here that just adds a little bit of an expense about the car. The way that the touchscreen and these switches operate is probably not to everyone's liking, but you do get used to it after a while. I suppose the thing is you have to hit the button here for the ventilation when it's on something else to be able to make it come up like that. It does sit over to the side here nowadays, so you can press the button on the side and it'll pop back to the ventilation, but it's still one press away from where it would be if it just had the controls on the dash. But even the new Mark 8 Golf has that, so that is really becoming, that has to be something that's accepted, I suppose. In the center here, I do like the little toggles that it has. They do work reasonably well. The seat heater buttons though are up on the side here, and they do take quite deliberate pressing to get them to work, but hey, you've still got them. There is a huge volume knob here that you cannot miss, which is excellent. And even though it's set up for left-hand drive, I think it still is easily reachable from the driver's seat. In this little flap here, we have the wireless charging on this model and in the GT one below it. So you pop it out, your phone sits in there, which is fine, but it also gives you this little tray that you can have, I think, a pen, because everyone carries pens around these days, a pen or a, I don't know, a laser beam, a piece of chalk. There's also 2 phone plugins here. This one's a USB, this one's USB-C. We also have a 12-volt outlet down the bottom here, and another little tray here that seems a little bit scratch prone because it does have already a few scratches on it. This little trigger grip transmission lever with manual down the bottom here does take a little bit of getting used to. It's more about pulsing it than anything else. The drive mode thing here, which does change between sport and normal and eco in this GT Sport model, and as we shall discover when we drive it, I think it's really worth faffing about with. It doesn't really need it. We've got an armrest here that's vinyl in the middle and texture on the side, and it does slide forward to give you an armrest. Inside of it is a bin. Oh, quite deep. It's got my coffee cup hidden in there. It's got another little tray here. It lifts in and out, a little rubberized thing. But I think the thing I like about this car the most is that this Nappa leather, this beautiful stitched Nappa leather, is standard in this GT Sport. And these seats are excellent. Even the driving position here, despite the steering position, is perfect. You have seat massaging functions down the side here that are also standard, and you can also fit this full camping bottle comfortably in the door, and we've got proper door grips on all doors, including the driver's. So there isn't really that much missing. Where you can really tell how much the new 2008 has grown up is in the back seat, because it feels so mature in here that I reckon it's probably more comfortable than the 3008 above it. This seat is really comfortable. It's got a great rake to it. You sit nice and deep down into the seat. I've got the seat in front of me as low as it'll go, yet I've still got room to move my feet around. My knees aren't touching the seat in front of me, and it's scalloped out to have a little bit more room here. The front passenger seat also has height adjustment, although it's manual in this car. This one has an electric seat. And while you don't get air vents in the back here, you do have very high set, huge vents in the middle there, and the two ones on the outer level are at this height. So it's feeding air through the car. You don't really feel like you're missing out on something. The belt line here seems to be kind of lower than it does in the front, or at least a similar level. There's a really good view in this car, and I suppose in the GT Sport here we do have this anthracite coloured headlining, which is quite dark, but with the optional sunroof, it does really open up the interior. Weirdly, there is a transmission tunnel here, and there is an electric version of this car, but it has a tunnel either the same. It has two USB ports in here, and they both are USB, not USB-C. One thing I will point out though is that the center seat in this car is really comfortable, and you never say that about almost any car. It has a really cushy base, it has a really cushy backrest. There's no center armrest, but you can easily sit 3 teens in the back of this car or squeeze 3 adults in it without it being an issue. I said that it had rear door grips, but it doesn't. It has the grabs in the roof. This one doesn't have it there, but it does fit Vietnam's favourite drink in the door quite comfortably. Yeah, I just think the backseat of this car is really good. It totally justifies the price.
Driven predominantly in urban stop-start conditions, combined with enthusiastic twisty road testing, the Peugeot 2008 GT Sport averaged 10.1 litres per 100 kilometres. Peugeot offers a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty with 5 years roadside assistance and 5 years cap price servicing. Recommended service intervals for the 2008 are every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, with a cap price cost totalling $1,433 for 3 years and $2,466 for 5 years.
On the road, the new Gen 2008 feels like a lot more grown-up car than it did before. The old car definitely had quite a lot of charm. It had a fluency to the way that it drove, and really quite a plush sort of ride that transferred into quite lovely involving handling. And I think the new car has lost a little bit of that in its attempt to be more of a mature vehicle. Now in this 2008 GT Sport here, we're on 18-inch wheels, and you can probably see that the ride isn't exactly what you would call plush. It's certainly not Peugeot plush like in the past, where that low amplitude bump smoothness was the brand's absolute forte. And I suppose that's a bit of a shame, but this has sport in the title, so you would hope that it had an element of sportiness to it, and it does. But the more that you push this car, I think the more that it delivers. It definitely has an underlying suppleness and absorbency and control to the suspension that is admirable and not always expected of a car in this class, like this small SUV class that it competes against. Yet the handling really is quite keen. Like, the steering isn't super fast geared, but it only has 10.4 metre turning circles, so you don't need to turn the wheel very far to really get the car to turn in quite quickly. And you've got this tiny little wheel, as we mentioned earlier, which really does give sort of like a sports bike kind of feel to the car. Some people might hate it, but I definitely like it. You warm to it, and it does make the 2008 feel like the involving little thing that it is. In a corner, the car turns in and really sits on its back axle, and much like the 308 that debuted in 2013, 2014 with its new generation platform, in that case the EMP2, this one is called CMP, which is like an EMP2 Lite. And what I was alluding to is that's exactly how it drives. It drives like a slightly higher, perhaps a bit heavier and a bit less polished version of the larger Peugeots above it, but I suppose that's where this car sits. The cars that we really should be comparing it against, though, are other small SUVs, and about the only one that I can really think of that does a significantly better job than this car in adding polish to the road is the Toyota CHR. It has that lovely silky smoothness to it that none of the premium cars that sit above this Peugeot have. And so I suppose that's probably where we should be comparing it against. Mercedes-Benz GLA, Audi Q2, BMW X1 and X2. Sorry, like, this car is better value than those cars, it's better to drive than those cars, and it has more personality than those cars. And so I suppose while you can look at the price of the 2008 GT Sport and go, well, this car's as tested price is $47,000, that's only the beginning of some of those other cars. And even when you're thinking about something like a Volkswagen T-Cross, which is really of a similar size to this Peugeot, then you need to add option packs to that car to get close to the equipment that this car has. So I suppose it's swings and roundabouts, really. In among the Peugeot lineup, the GT Sport is the absolute top model, and so it does get the highest spec engine. Under the bonnet of this car is Peugeot's excellent 1.2 litre turbo petrol 3-cylinder, which has been around since 2013 and has won multiple Engine of the Year awards and really is a terrific engine. In this car, it has more power than it's ever had. It has 114 kilowatts, which from a historical perspective is exactly the same power as what a VL Holden Commodore had when it got the Nissan 3-litre 6-cylinder engine, and we're in a 1.2. Admittedly, it's 35 years later, but it shows how far engines have come. We also have an 8-speed automatic in this car, whereas the two specs below this 2008 GT Sport only have a 6-speed. And while that power increase and the extra 2 ratios don't give it a huge amount of additional acceleration, Peugeot claims 0 to 100 in 8.7 in this car. It's 9.3 in the GT and the Allure below it. But it definitely gives it more of a pep instantly off the line, and it gives it a lovely drivability when you're cruising around. I suppose it doesn't really need 8 gears, let's be honest, but at the top end at least, this car does a 213 claimed top speed versus 199 in the two below it. So that is something there at the top end. And cruising in 8th gear, it doesn't really chop that much off the rev point that the 6-speed's doing, but there's always a gear to choose from at the right time. So we shouldn't be criticising that. This GT Sport also has steering wheel paddles, but again, I don't really know whether you need to use them that much. The gearbox is so good at picking the right gear, especially if you use this drive mode down here and put it into sport, where it really does perk it up quite a lot. Typical French automatic, and that it changes down going down hills and holds gears and really works really well with you to keep the right ratio at the right time. But you only need that when you're really hammering this car. The rest of the time, you can just leave the 2008 GT Sport in normal because the steering's still pretty well weighted. The gearbox is really good at channeling the torque of the engine. It's 240 Newton meters from 1750 RPM, and that is a lot. From a 1.2, like, that's tons. And it's just has this lovely thrummy warmth about the engine sound when it's cruising around. We're on 2500 revs at the moment, and it just has this lovely little charming sound to it. Perfectly smooth gear changes, and it's definitely come some distance from the old 81 kilowatt one in the previous car. One thing I like about the new Gen 2008 is that it doesn't really feel as big as it is. It's quite a lot bigger than the previous car. It weighs 1,287 kilos in this spec, and yet it never really feels it. You're sitting up quite high from the road and you've got a great view ahead, but you're also embedded in the car from the belt line and where you sit in it, and it just envelops you in this kind of driving style that again needs exploration to be able to get the best from it, but the more that you ask, the better it gets. In terms of the safety equipment in the GT Sport, it has everything that Peugeot offers, certainly in this size of car. It has adaptive cruise with stop and go. It has lane keep assist and steering assist down here on the right of the dashboard that you can turn off and they will stay off. But when you turn the cruise control back on again, it'll leave the steering assist on and help you out. And it does so with a reasonable amount of dexterity. It doesn't sort of snatch and grab. It just sort of guides you along. You are aware that it's working all of the time though, which is, I don't know, potentially a little bit annoying, but it doesn't really go that far. It's mostly helpful. So about the most difficult thing with the 2008 GT Sport is to actually position the car. you can look at it and go, well, that's pretty expensive at $47,000 with a massive optional sunroof and pearlescent metallic paint compared to the Japanese rivals that are sort of edging into the 40s in this category, and 47 is some way beyond 40, but at the same time, the European cars that it's competing against are just starting at that number. And the 2008 is actually sort of at the upper end of the sizing of a small SUV as well, because it has plenty of cabin space and boot space and feels reasonably premium, and it definitely looks premium. So I suppose you could potentially ignore this car because it's at its price point, but it is something that absolutely does not deserve to be ignored, because the more that you ask of this car, the better it gets, and you'll be different from everybody else. So it turns out that Peugeot 2008 GT Sport is actually a pretty good thing. Unlike the old 2008, which was very much a second car or a city car, this car has enough room and enough polish and enough performance and enough presence and enough class to really be the only car that you really need. The fact that it's also going to be offered in an electric version, the E2008, which is hopefully coming to Australia either late in 2021 or in 2022, kind of confirms just how comprehensive the complete makeover this car has had. But I think the best thing about it is that it looks distinctly premium, but it doesn't have a premium price like its German rivals. It is at the absolute top end of what you would pay for a Japanese small SUV, but it's almost like a small and a bit SUV. It's almost a medium SUV, and it has a real point of difference that I find extremely alluring, even though that's not the allure. Anywho, all three of them are good. This one just happens to be the best of the lot. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on the 2021 Peugeot 2008 GT Sport or on Chasing Cars. Thanks for watching.